Trying to put this video together has been a little bit strange. For starters, let's just get this out of the way. You may have heard, but I need to make abundantly clear that this was an alpha. Like an actual alpha test. Not one of those, hey, we're pretty much done the game except for optimization. Here's a little taste of playing to get you hyped. No, this was the opposite of that. It's more like, hey, this game is nowhere near complete, like not even close, like it's kind of shit as a game right now, but we know you're excited and maybe you want to spend some money to test it. So we took some assets and a few mechanics, plopped everything down on this island. Here you go, screw around, test our systems. That'll be $500. I feel like talking about this game is a challenge right now because there's so much genuine excitement around it. And I share that enthusiasm. Like, I am really looking forward to Ashes of Creation. But I want to present this video in a way that both acknowledges it's an alpha, so we shouldn't expect it to be done or polished, but also because they're wanting you to pay to test their game, just letting you know, like, here's what this thing is right now. I don't want there to be any surprises if you do decide to spend money at this very moment in terms of what you'll be getting. And I will say that I had a decent time playing Ashes last weekend. Like, it was really nice to get a sneak peek of this work in progress for this upcoming MMO that a lot of us are really pumped for. And there were plenty of elements and things about it that I really did enjoy. At the same time, it is clear that it's still very early in development. My guess is it probably needs another 2 to 3 years minimum just based on what we saw this weekend. Now, they were sure to point this out themselves with a few paragraphs of disclaimer right when you jump into the game, which said things like, this is not a content test. We know there's not much content. This alpha is to test our technical systems and architecture while demonstrating mechanics and design systems, but it's unpolished and not fleshed out. They also go on to say that the alpha is not intended to provide a game experience, nor, they say, is the playtest intended to be representative of the quality, polish, and content that Ashes will have at launch. So, fair enough. For all of those reasons, this video is not going to be a review of the alpha, because I agree. I don't think it's right necessarily to nitpick everything that's underbaked here, because pretty much everything is underbaked here, and they're saying as much themselves. They acknowledge this thing's not finished, it's not complete, it's not really a game, it is more of a test. I could tell you how the environments were all really bland. I would walk through patches of forest that literally had the exact same tree model, copy and pasted over and over again, or caves with 2 variations of crystals that they just resized and placed throughout. I could also bring up the fact that most of the camps and towns looked clearly just slapped together, like they just took every asset they had and tossed it into one spot, and how that exact camp layout was used in multiple locations, giving me a serious case of deja vu. Or I could point out how half the enemy NPCs would just stand around staring vacantly into the distance, having some existential crisis, thinking about their piling up bills or something, until I would bring them back to consciousness with a fireball to the face. Even though I just mentioned those things, I don't want to focus on them. That's not the point of this video, given that the game is so clearly and admittedly far from being complete. Like, reviewing it just doesn't make sense it just doesn't make sense right now, because everything that I just mentioned and anything else that's incomplete about this game that I could reasonably point out, we fully expect to improve with time. So with that said, what I want to do here is walk you through what I saw to give you a good sense of what the experience is right now. I put several hours in myself. I tried each one of the 3 available classes, and I did a bit of everything that I could think of. I did some questing, gathering, I did grinding, I did some exploring, and I want to show you what that looked like on one of the characters that I played. So let's go ahead and dive in to take a closer look at the Ashes of Creation alpha. It's like really an alpha. As with every MMO, the first step is making a character. There were 4 races to choose from, but beyond the lore and visual differences, I didn't see any indication of there being unique traits, passives, abilities, or anything right now, so I just went with human, then had to pick one of the 3 available classes. There was cleric, mage, or tank. I did decide to go mage as I figured that would be the highest damage and best for solo play, which is how I normally do MMOs. I tend to like to experience most of the leveling and exploring myself, and then I'll group up when necessary for dungeons, bosses, PvP, stuff like that. So finally, I picked from the small handful of visual customization options, named my new mage Ishbindu, then I was ready to play. Los gets, yeah? So the experience began with me spawning in on this platform. It kind of looked like a portal or something. There were these massive runes on the ground and this glowy thing coming up from the center. Then I got that, hey, this is an alpha, you dummy, pop-up that I mentioned earlier. And of course, just like EULAs in games, I read it thoroughly, start to finish. Now, as I started walking around, I will say my very, very first impression was that the game had a decent look to it. Now, yes, it's certainly unpolished and unfinished, like pretty much everything else that we're going to see here. But for the early stages, I think it's got a nice aesthetic and vibe. I genuinely like the way this looks. It actually reminds me of like a less wet looking version of the graphics in Elder Scrolls Online. You know how ESO is kind of wet and shiny, everything has this sheen to it. It looks like a not wet version of that. I'm not sure if it's just me, but I definitely see a resemblance and I like it. I also appreciate that they're not afraid to have some pops of color. We've got this vibrant aqua blue with the portal, or these bright orange and reds from the fire. I also love the scale of everything. Massive tower walls and these archways, for example. I do really like it when MMOs make you feel small by surrounding you with large structures or landmarks. I think it adds a sense of awe to the world. Now, as I made my way to the very first quest, which was to visit Sergeant Landry in a nearby camp, I also then took notice that the game's music was pretty darn good. It's got one of those epic adventurer orchestral sounds to it, kind of similar to what I liked about the music in, like, say, Skyrim or ESO. I think this is one of those elements of any RPG, really, that can sometimes go underappreciated, but when it's done right, makes a huge difference in terms of world immersion. So back to the camp. This unsurprisingly turned out to be the starting questing hub. There were a bunch of NPCs who had various tasks for me to complete. They wanted me to go kill these animated armors, purchase some harvesting tools, head to specific locations, interact with and read this little book here. Pretty much what you expect from MMO questing. One thing that you may notice in this process, though, is there are no quest markers over the NPCs' heads. There was no exclamation or question marks making it obvious that something was available or ready to turn in. Now, there will be icons on your mini-map for this sort of thing when you have a quest tracked and selected, but outside of that, nothing's slapping you in the face in the environment as you're walking around. I'm not sure if this is one of those situations where it's an intentional design choice or just a result of the alpha in its current state. Whatever the case, I didn't mind it the way that it was. So I went around, grabbed every quest I could find. I managed to hit level 2 in the process. Opening up my skill tree, I saw that I had 3 points to spend. Now, the tree was broken up into 3 branches. There was passive, active, and then weapon skills, but those were unavailable at the time. Being a sucker for trying new abilities, I ignored the passive tree completely and focused on unlocking more buttons for me to press. So I got Fireball, as well as its second tier, which added a dot to it, and then I put my last point into Blink. Then I headed out into the nearby ruins and was able to do my first kill quest, which gave me my first look at the game's combat. So right now, combat in Ashes of Creation is a hybrid of tab target and action. For tab target, you can either click or tab to lock onto an enemy, and then you cast your skills like my Fireball, which will automatically hit whatever you're tabbed onto. On top of that, there is a basic weapon attack, which was bound to Q by default. So for me as the mage, I had this wand that would shoot these magical sparks. So I would tab onto an enemy, cast my Fireball, and then just spam Q until it died. Alternatively, though, you do have the option at any time to freely swap into the action combat, which will slightly shift your camera position, puts a crosshair in the center of your screen, and hides your mouse cursor. With this, you're able to left click to do your basic attacks, and when you move your mouse, your character and camera will move without you having to hold down any of the mouse buttons. Which I will say, I found a lot more natural feeling because spamming Q to do my basic attacks was a little awkward. I did eventually change that keybind to like C, I think, but I still ended up using that action camera a lot of the time, especially since, as I found out later, you don't actually need to put the crosshair directly on your target to hit it. As long as you are tabbed onto an enemy and facing in its direction, your basic weapon attacks will just auto-direct to them. So that was pretty easy, and yeah, I think it just felt better. So at the moment, I don't think either variation of the game's combat feels particularly great. Other hybrid games like, say, Guild Wars 2 or even ESO, for example, I think do a much better job of their tab/action combat mixing. So hopefully this is one of those areas that they do intend to make some drastic improvements in. I will say, though, there was something about the combat that I like, and that was the sound effects for a lot of my abilities. My basic wand attack, my fireball. Really nice sounds to them. It just sounded good. But overall, yes, I feel the combat is definitely one of these areas that needs some pretty significant work. Also want to mention the blink in this game is sick. Both the sounds and the animations look really great. Okay, so I finished up my first kill quest and headed back to camp. At that point, I grabbed a few more quests, and then while I was collecting some items for the blacksmith, I got my first and actually only glimpse of PvP. Some people were chasing each other around. I heard a bunch of sounds, and then some poor soul just got demolished right next to me. I'm just going to assume that he was the bad guy, he started it, and he totally deserved it. A little weird though, because yeah, this was my only moment of seeing anything PvP related. I don't even know how the PvP works in this game. I might have missed it, but I don't even know how you flag for PvP, how you engage in PvP. I've got absolutely no clue. Hopefully in the future I figure this out. Okay, so with my quest log loaded up, I then ventured out to explore and start getting a lot of these things done. I had to patrol the camp's perimeter, looking for any threats that might be around. I then also made my way to a nearby forest to take out some of these large cats. In the process, I leveled up again, which unlocked my Drain Essence skill, which deals damage over time and restores mana. Nice. While up in some nearby mountains, I came across my first elite. There was nothing really tough mechanically about this encounter. It just seemed like it had more health and dealt more damage than normal mobs. All I had to do was kite. It was pretty simple, pretty easy. At this point, though, I also want to mention how disappointing looting was in the alpha. Like, sure, I would have liked something cool from this NPC, but just in general, looting feels not great. Like, there's no feedback at all. There's no animation and sound of you going through the process of looting. And there's no sound when you pick anything up, nor is there any on-screen pop-up or indicator of what it was that you looted. And on top of that, as far as I could tell in the alpha right now, the only thing that you can loot off of any enemies you kill are these essences, and then you sell these essences to vendors for cash, and then you can use that cash to buy stuff from vendors. I never found a cool piece of gear or weapon or anything interesting off of the enemies that I killed and looted. All of that interesting stuff came from buying from NPCs or as quest rewards. I assume and hope that this is another one of those things that is planned to change going forward. And talking about how the looting didn't feel good might sound weird, but it's a pretty big deal. You gotta have a nice sound when you're going through the looting process. Have some sort of animation, even if it's half a second. And then there should be some sound when you find something new, like you picked up a cool new item or something. That kind of feedback to looting makes looting feel better. And in games where getting loot is a big part of it, I think it can be pretty important. And since this is an alpha and we presume they're looking for critiques to improve things, I do want to mention something else. While I was out exploring, there were a ton of NPCs that were literally just plopped down in the environment. They would have some sort of an idle animation, but absolutely no pathing whatsoever. They never did anything interesting. Like, look at these nightlings. They just sit here stationary, flapping their wings. Lots of this stuff, I assume, is obviously just placeholders. One of the more memorable experiences I had early on was this cave. So I had to go here to search for some people who were missing. And when I first stepped in, I walked past these waterfalls that had some nice sounds to it, and I had to step through this puddled up water area that the falls were feeding into. And then I came across these luminous crystal formations, which had a really nice visual effect as their glow shined off of the wall and reflected off of the water. As I pushed further in, I noticed that the cave was filled with assortment of enemies. There were raptors, spiders, and giant aggressive mushrooms. Kind of an odd trio, but again, probably one of these things that's just not fleshed out. They're just taking the NPCs that they fully animated and are ready to be fought against. And like I mentioned earlier, with the scale of the world, the cave also had a great scale to it. Everything felt oversized, which makes you as a player feel small. And I think that's just such a great job of creating a sense of adventure and wonder while you're exploring. Stepping into this cave really reminded me of the feelings that I got in some old school MMOs. So similar vibes here. So if they can also make these areas more interesting visually and add some more object diversity to the environment, I do think they're really onto something here. In fact, I liked the cave so much that I spent a while here, at least 30 minutes or so, just grinding XP, killing the raptors and the mushrooms and the spiders. What a trio. I ended up leveling up in the process and put 2 skill points that I got into upgrading my Drain Essence, which added a heal and reduced its cooldown. And then while in the cave, I also completed a quest to gather some flowers. As I left, turning that in gave me some more essence, the only thing that you loot in this game, and then also let me pick from 2 reward options. So it was nice to see that they're going to have some choices. Although my options were a sword, which wasn't really for my mage because it helped physical damage, and then also like this till so I could do some farming. So I guess I'm a farmer now. Another area that I really liked early on while exploring was this crypt that I found north of the main quest hub. So I was asked to go there to clear out some bandits. That's my kind of job. I'm always down for that. On the way there, I couldn't help but notice a player engaged in combat next to some herbs. So of course I took the herbs from the player. His name was Hanzo, okay? I couldn't help myself. The crypt's entrance, stepping into this, actually reminded me a lot of going into delves in the Elder Scrolls Online, and that is a very positive association for me because I love ESO's delves. I always find them fun and I like going through them. Although unfortunately, this area here was very tiny. There wasn't a lot to see, but it all looked pretty good. Like there were crumbling walls, piles of stones and lumber, all of which was lit by these torches. Very dungeony. I like it. I like the dungeon feel. I appreciate the vibe. Right at the entrance to here, there was a level 3 elite, which had an incredible amount of health. Took us a while, but both Hanzo and I were able to whittle him down without too much issue. Great work, by the way, Hanzo. I'm sorry about yanking those herbs earlier. My apologies. So I made my way around the crypt. I was tasked with killing the bandits, but also collecting these runes. Then just as I was wrapping up, I came across this chamber with this really interesting looking gated structure. Now, I'm not sure if this is the case here, but I do know one of the big selling points with this game is the dynamic events. So essentially, depending on what the players on your server do in a particular zone or area, things like brand new areas, dungeons, and even boss fights can become available. So with that in mind, this here could be one of those areas where if our server met some sort of requirement, these gates might open up, which might expand the size of the crypt, leading to boss fights, new loot, or something like that. I'm not actually sure if that's true of this area in particular, but just knowing that in general, that is a thing with this game and that is a possibility. It's a pretty cool concept. It's a neat idea. Now, the next quest I did after leaving the crypt also plays into one of the game's major dynamic features, and that is the establishing and building up of towns. The introduction asked me to scout out 3 locations on the island. The first one was to the north up in the desert. Upon arriving, I found a small camp with a few tents and NPCs for crafting, trading, and buying things. I poked around a bit, seeing what they offered, and then just made my way east because it didn't seem like there was much I could do there. On the way to the second location, as a quick aside, I did find another cave, as you've heard. I really love these things. This one was really cool because it had a bunch of bioluminescent flowers. There were some ancient carvings and stone structures. Really cool visually. I hung around here for a bit, farming these angry flowers a bunch. I leveled up again, which unlocked my 3rd tier of active skills. From it, I picked the mana restoration skill, great utility there. Since while I was in here, I couldn't find any quest or any like secrets or anything to loot or even interact with, I just ended up leaving and making my way to the second camp. So this second camp was in the wetlands, and upon arriving here, I noticed it was identical to the last camp, like exactly the same layout, the same tents in the same locations, the same NPCs, all standing in the same spots. Deja vu big time, except this was just in another part of the island. Again, here's one of those things that we will assume they're planning to change in the future. I have to assume that every base camp isn't gonna look identical, like to a T identical. So noticing everything was the same, I left immediately and went to the 3rd and final spot. And this is where I got a pleasant surprise. So here I need to say that I started playing on the 2nd day of the beta. Had it been immediately on launch day, it's my understanding that this 3rd camp location would have looked just like those first 2. But because there was a full day of players doing stuff, this town had been established. So when I got to the third location, there was a large wooden wall surrounding a fairly built up town. There were a few central buildings providing various services and having important NPCs, numerous homes that players can purchase and customize scattered all around the town. And as I said, this is part of one of the game's dynamic systems. On the day that I wasn't playing, what it looks like to me is that the players of my server picked this as their starter town. Of the 3 possible locations, this is the area they decided to build up. Like the other 2, it would have began as just a camp with a few tents and NPCs, but by completing various tasks and contributing resources, they developed this area, creating this decently sized town. From what I also understand, this and what you see here is just the beginning. These towns can get dramatically bigger in size and grandeur with all sorts of massive structures and buildings available to construct. The stuff that we've seen in their trailers talking about this system make this town look small, like very, very small. These things can get crazy. So this system is absolutely one of the reasons many people are so excited about what Ashes of Creation is trying to do. And just seeing the difference between those first 2 camps and how built up this third location is pretty impressive, knowing that it was player driven. There were a few things to do and see in the town. I bought my very first mount here from the stable master. I checked out some of the various crafting and item vendors, explored some of the purchasable homes, some of which were actually decorated. I even liked the small feature of having to open and close the doors manually. And spending time in and around this first player established area was definitely one of the more impressive parts of my time with this game so far. Elements of it, in fact, reminded me a lot of some of what I loved about ArcAge as well. So when I finished exploring town, I then went out to do another quest chain. This one had me following an apparition and eventually led to a dungeon entrance. This place was really cool. It was massive with tons of interconnected hallways and rooms, all of which led to this large dragon boss at the end. There was a really sweet quest reward that I wanted, so I was hoping that I could just solo this thing, but absolutely not. It kicked my ass. So you definitely need a large group to kill this. And there weren't a lot of people playing at this time. I think this part of the recording was actually done on Sunday, the final day of the beta. So I was out of luck. There was just no one around. So I left the dungeon. I kind of putzed around for a while doing a few more quests. And then, satisfied with what I saw from this first alpha test, I logged off. I do also want to say, I think this is pretty important to the whole thing here. A big part of what they wanted to test with this alpha was the back-end systems, things like server stability, the performance, stuff like that. On that front, I gotta say, I had no problems. Now, as I mentioned just a moment ago, I did start playing on the second day, so while there were some people around, it wasn't as packed as the servers were on launch day. I'm not sure how performance was for people on that first day, but for me, everything was super smooth. The game ran well on my system. I had 0 disconnects while I played. I never experienced any major rubber banding or server lag, or any real big problems with the performance to speak of. So overall, on that front, a big part of what they were testing here, I was quite pleased with. And with that, I think that's gonna do it. That is a look at the Ashes of Creation alpha test that I took part in last weekend. Now, like I said at the start, putting together this video has been a bit of a strange experience. I guess what's so unusual about this situation is typically we don't get such a good look at a game this early in development without there also being an NDA attached. So we're not really used to seeing something that's so unfinished, being playable, having videos made about it, but also being purchasable, which is where I get a tad uneasy talking about this game. Look, it's pretty obvious there's a lot of hype around this thing, and Intrepid Studios knows there's a lot of hype around it, and so they're making some extra money off of that hype. That is why they're selling $500 alpha access to test back-end systems of their game. They don't have to do that. Normally, what most alpha tests to test serviceability and back-end systems would do is they would just send out invites to people who sign up. And if the player count gets lower than what they want for their testing, then they just invite more of the people who sign up, all of which without a price tag. But that's not what's happening here. So if you do decide to buy in to play Ashes of Creation right now, just know what you're getting yourself into, which hopefully at this point I've made abundantly and repetitively clear. And another thing I want to make clear is I am really excited for this game. I think Ashes has a lot of potential. I see what people are so excited about, and I am the same way. With the node system, the evolving content based on what the server players decide to do, the way they're talking about PvP, the trading, the caravans, these towns that can get built up into huge metropolises, it's all really cool sounding. As of this moment, from what I saw in testing, they have a good groundwork, but there's still a long, long way to go. But I hope they nail it, and I'm gonna keep an eye on this thing. So there you go. Appreciate you guys checking out my content as always. Thank you for your support. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.